In 1798, Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Egypt. He brought with him not just an army, but a team of scientists, artists, engineers, and scholars. 150 of them. Their mission was not military, it was intellectual. To document, measure, and record everything they found in the oldest civilization on Earth. What they found at a temple complex called Dendera stopped them completely. On the ceiling of a small chapel in the Temple of Hathor, a goddess of love, beauty, and the sky, there was a circular carved relief approximately 2.5 meters in diameter. It covered the entire ceiling of the chapel, and carved into it, in extraordinary detail, was a map of the night sky. The 12 constellations of the zodiac arranged in a circle. The planets, depicted as deities moving through the constellations. The stars, represented with a precision that Napoleon's astronomers found immediately recognizable, not as primitive pictograms, but as accurate astronomical representations. They had never seen anything like it. The scholars drew it. They measured it. They published it. And then the debate began, a debate that has not been fully resolved in over 2 centuries. What date does the Dendera Zodiac record? Because the zodiac is not simply a decorative ceiling. It is a map of the sky at a specific moment in time. The positions of the planets relative to the constellations, the particular configuration recorded in the carving, occur only once in thousands of years. If you can decode the positions correctly, you can calculate the exact date the zodiac was designed to record. And when researchers began to calculate that date, what they found was not the Ptolemaic period in which the temple was built. It was something much, much older. The Temple of Hathor at Dendera is one of the best preserved temple complexes in Egypt. Unlike the ruins at Karnak or the damaged structures at Abydos, Dendera's temple still stands largely intact, its walls still holding their original color in places, its ceilings still carved with the same detail that Napoleon's scholars encountered in 1798. The temple was built in the Ptolemaic period, the era of Greek-speaking pharaohs that began with Alexander the Great's conquest of Egypt in 332 BC and ended with Cleopatra's death in 30 BC. The main temple was constructed beginning around 54 BC, with additions continuing into the Roman period. This is the conventional dating of the building. But the Dendera Zodiac on its ceiling is a different question entirely. A building can be built in one period and decorated with knowledge from another. A Ptolemaic architect building a temple for an Egyptian goddess would draw on the full tradition of Egyptian astronomical knowledge. Knowledge that was not invented in the Ptolemaic period, but accumulated over millennia. The question is not when the ceiling was carved. The question is when the astronomical knowledge encoded in the ceiling was first recorded. And here, the debate becomes fascinating. Napoleon's scholars were the first to seriously attempt to decode the Dendera Zodiac, and their conclusions, published in the monumental description de l'Egypte, caused immediate controversy. Several of the French astronomers calculated dates from the planetary positions shown in the zodiac that were significantly earlier than the Ptolemaic period. One calculation placed the original recording of the astronomical configuration at around 700 BC. Another suggested dates going back thousands of years further. The controversy was so significant that it reached the French Academy of Sciences. scholars argued publicly about the correct interpretation. The positions of the planets, the identification of which deities corresponded to which astronomical bodies, the question of whether the zodiac showed an actual observed sky or a symbolic arrangement, all of these became matters of serious academic dispute. The debate was never fully resolved. It was, instead, absorbed. The Ptolemaic dating of the temple was established. The zodiac was attributed to the Ptolemaic period by default, and the question of what date the astronomical configuration actually encoded was set aside. Not answered, but set aside. As so often in this series, the question that couldn't be comfortably answered was simply stopped being asked. Here is what the Dendera Zodiac shows when you look at it carefully. At its center is the North Celestial Pole, the point around which the entire sky appears to rotate. Around it, the constellations of the northern sky. Then, in a circle around that, the 12 zodiac constellations, the band of the sky through which the sun, moon, and planets move. Within the zodiac band, 5 figures are shown moving through the constellations. These represent the 5 planets visible to the naked eye: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Each planet is depicted at a specific position within the zodiac, and the positions are not random, they are not symbolic. They represent an actual configuration of the night sky, a moment in time when those 5 planets occupied those specific positions relative to those specific constellations. That configuration is calculable. Astronomers can run the positions of the planets backward through time using the laws of orbital mechanics and determine exactly when those planets were in those positions. The mainstream calculation, working from the assumption that the zodiac records an event in the Ptolemaic period, identifies a solar eclipse that occurred on March 7th, 51 BC, as the most likely date the zodiac was designed to commemorate. This date fits with the construction of the temple. It is consistent with the Ptolemaic period. It is the date that mainstream Egyptology has largely settled on. But not everyone agrees, and the disagreement is not trivial. The Ptolemaic date calculation requires specific assumptions about which figures in the zodiac represent which planets and which events, eclipses, planetary conjunctions, specific stellar positions, the zodiac was designed to record. Change those assumptions, even slightly, and the date changes dramatically. Romanian mathematician Nicolaus Saxe, working in the 19th century, calculated a date of around 700 BC for the astronomical configuration in the zodiac, consistent with the late period of Egyptian history, but still several centuries earlier than the Ptolemaic construction of the temple. Other researchers, working from different interpretive frameworks, have calculated dates going back much further, into the 2nd millennium BC, or the 3rd millennium, or further still. And a small group of researchers, working from the hypothesis that the zodiac encodes precession, have arrived at dates that mainstream Egyptology will not consider. Precession is the slow wobble of the Earth's axis, which causes the positions of the stars relative to the equinoxes to shift over a cycle of approximately 26,000 years. Different stars serve as the pole star at different points in the precessional cycle. The constellations that rise on the eastern horizon at the spring equinox change over millennia. The Orion correlation theory, which Robert Bauval proposed for the pyramids of Giza, is fundamentally a precessional argument. The alignment of the pyramids to Orion's belt as it appeared in 10,500 BC, is a precessional calculation. The Dendera Zodiac also encodes precessional information. The position of the north celestial pole relative to the surrounding constellations reveals the precessional epoch in which the original astronomical observation was made. When researchers calculate the precessional epoch encoded in the zodiac, not the planetary positions, but the position of the celestial pole, some of them arrive at a date that is not Ptolemaic, not late period, not Old Kingdom. Some of them arrive at a date in the region of 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, the same date that the Sphinx's water erosion points to, the same date that the Orion correlation encodes, the same date that appears again and again when researchers look carefully at the oldest and most anomalous elements of Egyptian civilization. In 1820, the Dendera Zodiac was removed from the ceiling of Hathor's chapel, not by archaeologists conducting a careful excavation, not by the Egyptian government protecting its own heritage, but by a French entrepreneur named Sébastien Louis Saulnier, who hired a team of workers and used saws and jacks and brute force to cut the 2.5-meter circular stone from the ceiling that had held it for 1,800 years. The removal damaged the chapel. It left a jagged hole in the ceiling that is still visible today, replaced by a plaster cast that Saulnier commissioned as a consolation for the Egyptian authorities who had been unable to stop him. The original zodiac was shipped to France and sold to King Louis XVIII for 400,000 francs. It was placed in the Royal Library in Paris, later the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, where it remained until 1922, when it was transferred to the Louvre, where it sits today. In Paris, behind glass, in a museum in a country that did not build it, does not own the civilization that created it, and acquired it through an act that, by any modern standard, would be classified as cultural theft. The Egyptians have a plaster cast. The French have the original. And the question of what date the original encodes, the question that Napoleon's scholars began arguing about in 1799, and that has never been fully resolved, belongs to neither of them. It belongs to the stone itself. And the stone is not talking. There is a chamber at Dendera that most visitors never see. Below the main temple, accessible through small doorways that require crouching to enter, there is a series of crypts, underground rooms built into the foundations of the temple, their walls covered in some of the most detailed and most unusual relief carvings in Egypt. The crypts served, according to conventional Egyptology, as storage rooms for the temple's ritual objects, the statues, the sacred vessels, the implements used in the ceremonies performed above. But the carvings on the crypt walls are not inventory lists. They are something far more difficult to explain. Among the most debated images in all of Egyptian archaeology are two relief carvings in the Dendera crypts that show what appear, to modern eyes, to be elongated bulb-shaped objects on pedestals, with figures standing inside them, connected by a serpentine cable to a lotus-shaped base. They are known informally as the Dendera lamps. The mainstream explanation is that they are symbolic religious imagery, that the bulb shapes represent lotus buds. The serpents inside them represent the primordial serpent of Egyptian mythology, and the pedestals represent the Djed pillar associated with Osiris. This explanation is consistent with Egyptian iconography and should not be dismissed. But the images are unusual enough that engineers and physicists who have seen them have noted an uncomfortable resemblance to specific modern objects, specifically to early discharge tubes, the predecessors of fluorescent lamps, in which an electrical current passed through a gas-filled glass bulb produces light. The resemblance may be coincidence, ancient religious imagery, interpreted through modern eyes trained to recognize modern technology, will sometimes produce apparent matches that are not real. But the Dendera crypts are in a temple whose ceiling carries a map of the sky that may encode astronomical knowledge from 10,000 years ago. They are in a city that sits in the same country as the Serapeum, the Osirian, the Great Pyramid, and the Sphinx, all of which have produced evidence of capabilities that the conventional model of ancient Egyptian civilization does not explain. One anomalous image in one location can be dismissed, a pattern of anomalous evidence across an entire civilization, all pointing toward the same conclusion, that something existed before what we acknowledge, is harder to dismiss. And the Dendera lamps, whatever they are, sit in the crypts of a temple whose ceiling carries the most debated astronomical document in the ancient world. The Dendera Zodiac was designed by people who understood the sky, not approximately, not symbolically, with a precision that allowed them to record the positions of 5 planets relative to 12 constellations in sufficient detail that modern astronomers can calculate the date it was meant to preserve. That level of astronomical precision requires long observation, generations of careful sky watching, record keeping, and mathematical analysis. The kind of astronomical tradition that takes centuries, possibly millennia, to develop to the point where planetary positions can be recorded with this accuracy. The Ptolemaic Egyptians who built the Temple of Hathor at Dendera did not develop this tradition. They inherited it from the pharaonic Egyptians who preceded them, who inherited it from the earlier dynasties, who inherited it from the pre-dynastic cultures whose traces appear at Abydos and Saqqara and Giza. And those cultures, the evidence of this series keeps suggesting, inherited it from something earlier still, a tradition of astronomical observation so old that it encoded precessional epochs, so sophisticated that it tracked the 26,000-year cycle of the Earth's axial wobble, so precise that it could record the position of the celestial pole at a time when the pole star wasn't Polaris. Not any star that our current epoch recognizes as the North, but a different star, in a different position, in a sky that no living person has ever seen. The sky of 10,000 years ago, the sky that the Sphinx faces, the sky that the Giza pyramids map, the sky that the Dendera Zodiac may have been designed to remember. The stone is in Paris, the original 2.5-meter circular carving that Napoleon's scholars found on the ceiling of Hathor's chapel, that Saulnier cut out and shipped across the Mediterranean, that Louis XVIII bought for 400,000 francs. It is in the Louvre, in a room called the Sully Wing, behind glass, labeled with a date, circa 50 BC. That is the mainstream consensus, but not the only serious scholarly position. Millions of people walk past it every year. Most of them do not know that its date is disputed. Most of them do not know that the planetary positions it records have been calculated by serious astronomers to correspond to dates ranging from the Ptolemaic period back to epochs that predate the conventional beginning of Egyptian civilization. Most of them do not know that the crypts of the temple it came from contain images that have been compared, however controversially, to electrical discharge tubes. Most of them do not know that the temple sits in a country whose oldest sites, Giza, Saqqara, Abydos, keep producing evidence of a level of knowledge and capability that the standard model of ancient history cannot fully explain. They see a circular stone carving with zodiac figures. They read the label. They move on. The stone does not move. It sits in Paris, 2.5 meters of carved Ptolemaic sandstone, holding inside it a date that 200 years of scholarship has argued about and never fully resolved. A date that might be 50 BC, or 700 BC, or 10,000 BC, or something in between. The map of a sky that someone a very long time ago wanted to preserve, for reasons that the stone cannot tell us, in a language that we have not yet fully learned to read. The Dendera Zodiac is not the end of this story. It is a map, and maps point somewhere. The question is whether we are willing to follow where this one leads. Back through time, back through the precessional cycle, back to a sky that no living person has seen, and a civilization that looked up at it and decided to remember. There is one more calculation that this series cannot leave behind. Precession moves the celestial pole through the constellations at a rate of approximately 1 degree every 72 years. A complete cycle, from one position back to the same position, takes 25,920 years. The ancient Egyptians knew this number. It appears encoded in the dimensions and proportions of the Great Pyramid, in calculations that researchers, including John Michel and Graham Hancock, have traced through the monument's measurements. The pyramid's base perimeter, divided by its height multiplied by 2, produces an approximation of pi. Its dimensions encode the circumference of the Earth at the equator in a specific mathematical relationship. And the precessional number, 25,920, appears in various proportional relationships within the structure. This is not coincidence. Mathematical coincidences in a structure built to the tolerances of the Great Pyramid do not arise by accident. They are placed there by people who knew the number, who knew the precessional cycle, who understood that the sky changes over thousands of years, that the pole star shifts, that the constellations rise at different points on the horizon in different epochs, that the position of the sun at the spring equinox moves through the entire zodiac over a period of nearly 26,000 years. The Dendera Zodiac encodes a specific moment in that cycle. The Great Pyramid encodes the cycle itself. The Sphinx faces the horizon at the equinox, pointing at the constellation that rose there in 10,500 BC. 3 separate monuments, 3 separate encodings of the same astronomical knowledge, all pointing to the same epoch, all built by people who understood something about time, about the deep time of the precessional cycle, that our civilization did not rediscover until the Renaissance. A civilization that watched the sky for long enough to measure a cycle of 26,000 years. That is not a generation of sky watchers. That is not a dynasty of astronomers. That is a civilization with a continuous tradition of observation spanning tens of thousands of years. A civilization whose monuments we are still standing inside, whose knowledge we are still failing to fully decode, whose map carved on the ceiling of a chapel in Dendera, cut out and shipped to Paris, labeled with a date that may be 2,000 years too recent, is still waiting to be read correctly. The Dendera Zodiac is a message from people who understood the sky better than we have given them credit for, to whoever came after them and was patient enough to look up. The message is written in the language of the stars, and it is pointing, as all the evidence in this series has been pointing, to a moment before our history began, to a civilization before our civilization, to a knowledge before our knowledge, to a sky that we have not yet learned to remember. But that someone, a very long time ago, carved in stone so we would not forget.